It is.
Yes, oh yes, oh yes.
I know. Hi there.
Okay, folks, can we get started? We're a little past time. Vice Mayor Wade will join us in a couple of minutes. He advises he was running a little bit late. Folks may not be aware, but councilors are virtually always running from one meeting to another. Councilor Pinkston and I just left an MPO meeting that went from 4 to 6, and Juan's got a similar kind of issue, I'm sure. So this is, I guess, round 4 of our list of work sessions that we wanted to have specifically on the zoning ordinance. And I will note, by the way, for the record, that 4 of us are here, 5 is coming. So the goal of the work session is for us to decide on the Charlottesville Development Code text and map, which the council will advertise for public hearing and consideration, and to select the date of that public hearing. We have 2 choices, December 5 or December 7. And so, because this is sort of the initial procedural stuff that we have to get through, Mr. Freeze, I'm going to ask you to help us help you.
Absolutely, thank you. So our objective is to identify the ordinance that you guys want to advertise. So tonight is less about final decisions and more about how do we set you guys up so that your deliberations following the public hearing are optimized for your ability to identify the best, what you deem to be the best ordinance for the purpose for adoption. So.
Okay.
We've laid out here kind of a series of topic areas that we have identified, but we recognize there may be a number of others to consider.
Sure.
The main thing to think about is if there's an idea or an ordinance provision that you want to be able to deliberate on, it has to show up in the ordinance for the purpose of the advertisement.
So, in other words, we can't add something to the ordinance without having to re-advertise, which is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to have one advertisement, one public hearing, one vote.
You got it.
Okay. And so I will tell folks, by the way, that the decision to include things in the advertised version is therefore we're going to err on the side of inclusivity of provisions, and that does not mean that merely because we're adding it in or because we're agreeing to put a particular provision in, that reflects council's decision that we know where the 5 votes are. We don't even know where the 3 votes are at this point. So, but we want, again, one hearing, one advertisement, one vote. So the first one we've got designated is a proposed RNA core neighborhood district. You want to start us off on that?
Absolutely. So this district, and this one is a bit of a late entrance into the deliberative process, but this district implements an idea that was first introduced in the comprehensive plan as the sensitive community areas proposal. It, as a starting point, it identifies a set of core neighborhoods that have served as a location for workforce housing historically, and there's a desire to see that we continue to provide that use going forward. The proposal takes it's a variation on the RNA district, but it is a base district, and it reduces the base density in the district to 1 unit per lot. Provides a bonus where the existing structure is preserved of up to 3 units, so 2 additional units. And that's really, the idea there is to create the opportunity in the space for accessory dwelling units, right? Because where you're preserving the existing structure, additional structures would in some respects be accessory to that. And then finally, as the RNA district is proposed today on its own, the RNA district would allow up to 6 units where all of the bonus units are affordable, 60% of AMI. And then there's some reductions in the overall massing that's allowed within this district. I'm not going into details, but it's all listed there. in your packets on these pages that you all received. That reduces the scale basically of what structure can be built within the district. And then there's an area that's mapped for that. And I want to emphasize that in terms of thinking about advertising this, we want to separate the text from the map. If you want to be able to consider this district, the text has to show up in the ordinance, right? As far as the map is concerned, there's really three options available to you. One is to not map this district at all to begin with. The second one would be to map the district as presented in the planning commission recommendations. And the third option would be to consider expanding it. The caution I want to give you is, as we've discussed in this process, where you're increasing from the point of having done the advertisement, we can only decrease the intensity without having to go back and do a re-add and re-public hearing.
Isn't the opposite?
It's decreased intensity is the issue. And because this district decreases intensity, am I?
So you're correct. So, Councilor Payne, the idea here is to advertise the most intensive use that council would consider, and you can dial that back without having to redo it. And because this district is less intense, the approach of having the text will give you freedom, because you can delineate any districts that, any areas that you include in this new district will, by definition, be less intense, and therefore we will be fine from an advertising and a not having to go back standpoint.
I understand you can't have lower density than what you advertise without re-advertising. Thank you.
Perfect. So with regards to this district, whatever we map, if we then wanted to go back and say, you know what, this area, we don't want to include it, we would have to re-advertise and do a new public hearing. Is that clear?
But if you went larger, you could scale back and not have to re-advertise.
No,
Or am I getting it
no,
backwards?
so this is what the planning commission proposed for this district.
Can I get a copy
Yes,
of
you
that?
absolutely can. In fact, everyone can have a copy of that.
One for you, one for you.
That's all that I got.
One more. If you have it,
All right.
we can share.
Oh, hold on. I probably should have one.
You probably should, yes.
Did everyone get one who wants
I'll
one?
email it.
Are you good?
Yeah. So this is the area of the RNA that the planning commission has recommended at this point in time.
Yeah.
If you advertise this, if the council then desired to reduce the area, that would require us to re-advertise and conduct a new public hearing.
Which is more intense.
Because this is the least intense, this becomes the least intense
Right.
district that we have.
Any change we
Okay.
make it more intense.
But if we,
So the options that present you guys with the greatest degree of flexibility
that's what I wanna
post-advertisement
know about.
would be to either not depict this district on the map at all, or go with the planning commission recommendation. But once you go with the planning commission recommendation, you're kind of stuck with this.
But Mr. Freese, just to emphasize, the maximum flexibility would be to simply advertise the text and not advertise a map at all with respect to this new district.
That's what I needed to know. But the text needs to be as broad as it can be, so that if you need to do this, you can. Because if you do this, you have to re-advertise to do this.
Correct.
No
So-
map.
So you
Got it.
re-advertise this, when we say the text, it would have this new sheet in the.
We would advertise with this in here,
But it
but not
wouldn't-
map it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that seems to make sense to me.
That makes sense to me too. Forget the map. Got it.
Unless you're doing it as well.
I'll say, in particular, it makes sense to me because the way I understood the text does not reflect what's on this map. So maybe I didn't understand the text.
We're gonna move to the next item, and then I think that'll clear up where you're at.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's two districts at play here. This is the RNA district, which is a
Right.
base district that's, it basically is in the neighborhoods, it's implementing that sensitive community area idea from the comprehensive plan. The second district. The second district is the core neighborhoods corridor overlay district, which overlays on Preston and Cherry, is proposed on Preston and Cherry Avenue.
Okay, that's what I thought
That's
we were
what I thought
talking.
you were thinking of, yeah.
And is that shown here yet?
We haven't mapped that one at all, it's simply described in the text, but the same principles apply, because the underlying premise of that district is, that the starting point is that we lower the proposed density to the CX3 for those corridors,
Mm-hmm.
and then apply the overlay. So, again, if you want your maximum degree of flexibility, then we adopt the text. We remove the references to the area that those apply to in the text. And we don't map.
Okay.
So I apologize if y'all went over this before I get in these. this
No, we
cer-
didn't.
Okay, good. I apologize. I had to work late today. So my main concern was this area, this core
Mhm.
neighborhood district, and that next year, sometime next year, we're gonna start the process of doing a more intensive review of these neighborhoods.
Yes.
And I understand that we can't say, okay, let's just kind of put things on pause until we do the study, because things will continue to roll. Will this, how will, if we, go with a zoning ordinance that does not include the map, but includes the sheet that you, how does that allow us, you as staff and us as decision makers, to approve, not approve whatever developments until those studies are done?
So let me clarify the process going forward, because we did talk about this before you came.
See, Lloyd?
There was one thing we could.
Uh-oh, here we go.
So where we are today is we are, as shown on this sheet, which
Yeah.
you have, but you probably haven't had a chance to see yet. Our goal tonight is to identify what ordinance do we want to advertise, so that after you guys have conducted your public hearing,
Mhm.
you have the optimal opportunity to deliberate and produce the best ordinance that you deem for the city, right? So sorry, I actually lost my train of thought there for a moment. So where we are right now is we're deciding what to advertise.
I got it.
When we come back after the public hearing, you guys will then, this body will need to decide where does this get mapped, and where does it get applied, and then it will be in effect at that point.
Is that discussion was just for the advertisement?
Yes, so we're just talking about for the purposes of advertisement, we include these districts in the text, but then the map is silent on these districts, and then when we come back in your deliberations, you identify where on the map you want to apply
Right,
these
okay.
districts.
Okay, that makes more sense.
We'll still at that time have the recommendations to planning commission and any other considerations, plus the benefit of the public hearings.
Public input, yeah.
And along with that, this other text, and I'm jumping ahead,
Nope, sorry.
the rest of this text that was basically,
Oh, yeah, that was the next time, that was the
Okay,
next
well,
time.
wait.
But let me, so it probably is helpful then, I've described the RNA district and what that does. The corridor is slightly different. It has as a starting point that we take these corridors, or what corridors is applied to, and apply the CX3 zoning district. And then an applicant would be able to increase the height beyond that base.
it's in the back of your, did you not get the whole packet?
No, I don't have that. I don't have what you have.
That's because they printed it off for me, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Okay, I've already got it.
Don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
I think
Okay.
Yeah.
this
Wanna
is
make
the
sure
other
that-
one that we're talking about.
Is this the one that they sent in the email? Yeah,
That and this.
okay.
So, Mr. Freeze, are we going to, with respect to the corridors, is the suggestion or recommendation to have some showing of where?
Ultimately, we would show them on
Corridors.
the map, yeah. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Would we contemplate asking council if they wish to have a discussion regarding perhaps the areas, the corridors that would be part of the advertisement, or?
Yeah, because this document actually lays out roughly where it's gonna be.
It identifies two corridors.
Mhm.
You wanna see it?
Yes, please.
Go ahead. So that, once again, we would just do the verbal about the map, right?
Correct.
Okay, okay, all right, we're good.
If I might,
I'm good.
for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Pandak. I'm working with James and the CMJ. So,
And we normally see you by Zoom.
yes,
Mike.
I am no longer disembodied for the current time. Thank you, Councilman.
You're welcome.
Two things. On the text, if you want maximum flexibility, want the concept, but not showing it anywhere, then you would have to modify, as Counselor said, this draft of the text to remove C1A and B from that. Okay? The attempt was to give guidance in this particular with the first two corridors in the text itself. So bear that in mind.
That would help to address the more intensive, less intensive.
Right. Secondly, you could advertise it as is with those two described corridors, which are not completely mapped if you don't change the map as James has indicated. That may lend a little confusion. Or you can, as he said, the third option is just adopt the concept of corridors without applying them in any way at this time and apply them later. And as you think about that, you're going to want to think about what message does that send as to where those corridors might be or not be, and is that something that is, from a policy standpoint, a good idea right now, or is it better to show where the corridors are going to be? As the counselor indicated, your further discussions about small area plans later doesn't prevent you from modifying those corridors in terms of their boundaries later. So, lots of options.
So, are you saying that in B, we have identified the core neighborhood? But
The
you're-
corridor districts.
Yes, the
Yeah.
core corridor districts have been identified in B. But,
We've got two,
Two corridors. you're
two
correct.
corridors.
right, but they have been identified, they means more than one, have been identified in B1. But you're saying if we want flexibility, we have to eliminate C1A and C1B.
Right, it would, if you want total flexibility, because otherwise you have, by text, generally mapped the areas.
Okay.
But you have not actually shown, as you have with other mapping, as the Planning Commission did, for example, on this RNA, particular parcels.
So it's all right to identify, but to have maximum flexibility, we don't need to talk about this
That
in
is-
text.
That is correct. And
Okay.
then you should look to James to tell you what, from a planning perspective, that means.
And it means,
I'm sorry, just what in particular, what means?
if we eliminate C1A and C1B, the text,
Yeah,
what does that mean from a planning perspective?
if I handed away my copy, I
Oh,
apologize. Thank you, we can work together on this.
Oh, okay.
C1, A, and B, all right, yeah. I think what we would want to do is substitute something that describes, because the core function of this district is basically to say, the zoning on this corridor is now CX3, max height of 3 stories. If you want additional stories, you have to provide up to, or a minimum of 2 of the items on this
Correct.
community benefit list, right?
Right.
So this section kind of defines what those bonuses are depending on which corridor you're in.
Yes, sir.
We would want to replace that with something that's either standardized and say, wherever this district is applied, it's worth a three-story bonus,
Okay.
or something else along those lines.
Okay,
So, let's make sure I'm tracking. They're saying it's okay to advertise this.
No, we would, so again, if you guys want to maximize your flexibility,
That's what
we
we wanna
take this
do.
out.
No, he's saying keep that, but take this out.
yes,
Who's saying?
I thought that's what they said.
that's what she said.
Keep the detail in paragraph B, but remove it in paragraph C.
Paragraph B is essentially the function that maps this district. And so if, since the idea with, at the maximum level of flexibility, you want to demap the district and simply carry the concept forward. The district is essentially mapped in two provisions here. We would remove B, which is the mapping function, and then C, we would modify to universalize that benefit that comes with the.
Is that gonna make it so abstract though to not really be able to?
Well, then after you guys have advertised it, and we get into deliberations, we can come back to that question. So what we would want to put in here is probably the highest bonus height we'd want to consider, so that we can come down from there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, but, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, I forgot your name again.
Sharon, that's
Sharon,
okay.
you had mentioned that, and you stopped, or maybe I stopped paying attention, I should say, but you were saying that what type of message that will
Same.
give, and I missed what,
Well, I defer to James on that, on the planning basis for it. Does it defeat the purpose of having this district if you're not sending a message that particular corridors are where you want to locate it? Or is it fine as a concept without any indication of the corridors? As I understand it, the concept derived in part from the view that there were certain areas in the city that ought to have concepts like this embodied in it, and that it arose from geographical areas as opposed from the concept itself. And so that's, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, you can do it either way. It's not a legal issue, it's a question, and that's why I think James speaks better to it. I have to watch if I do planning.
But it seems to me that, maybe I'm misunderstanding, all we're talking about now is what we advertise, not what we vote.
right.
Right.
And as long as by December or whatever, we voted on a specific description in those two places, then, I mean, I understand the notion of, gee, what kind of a message are you sending? And the message that we're sending is, we're not quite ready to make a decision yet, which I would not want to take beyond, the decision on what ordinance we pass. But I'm not terribly concerned about sending the message that we're still thinking about it over the next 30 days.
Well said.
And so, in terms of maximum flexibility, deleting the specific text, but adopting the broadest bonus density, which would be 4 stories.
So you would actually delete the words Preston Avenue and Cherry Avenue in that whole document?
Right, I mean, what I do is I'd take in that section C, I'd consolidate A and B into one line and say bonus density would be granted of up to 4 stories. And then section B would be, we'd delete the sections, the 2 corridors entirely.
Okay.
And by doing that, we get maximum flexibility.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. That's what we need to do. Okay.
Are we good with that?
Yes.
What do we need to do next? What do we need to think about next?
All right.
So one, both, all of that is covered?
Yep, we just did all of that. So, the second item, and this is a lot of stuff kind of bundled up into it, but you all received recommended changes to the ordinance from the planning commission.
Mm-hmm,
A handful.
yes, all those.
The question really is, are there any of those, you can take this either way, but are any of those that you would like to not include within the advertisement for whatever reason?
This is the one we went back and forth on.
And I guess I'm confused because I went through the 30-some items on the changes to the development code, but I didn't remember seeing a list of specific parcels or areas
Sorry, this
on
is
the
just,
map.
so there's there's two documents that you guys received that were part of the resolution passed by the council. One was.
By the planning commission.
I'm sorry, by the planning commission, thank you. The recommendation provided by the planning commission. One is a list of,
Is this Friday, the 20th?
yeah. My stack is gone.
It's, the document titled resolution, at the end of it outlined all the specific parcel changes with GIS mapping on them.
Yeah, so there were 84
Jeez.
text changes, and then separately, there are a set of proposed map changes that are parcel specific, proposed by the planning.
I didn't even see this. I didn't look at
So what I can say, let's, we can treat each of these separately. What I can say about the planning commission's recommendations relative to the map is that each of them represents an increase in the proposed intensity. So in this case, if you want to be able to deliberate on each of these, you would include them. If there's any of these that you, at this point in time, categorically disagree with, then you would not include them.
And when you say include, this is for the advertisement for the.
This is for the purpose of advertisement, not for the purposes of making a decision on the final zoning ordinance. It's a question of what you would choose to want to be able to deliberate on amongst these.
I'm happy to deliberate on them. I guess the ones I have the most questions on are the NX5 to NX10, as well as the Venable Neighborhood one. But I'm open to more dialogue on them. Those are the ones that jumped out to me that made me kind of wonder the most, but I guess not to the point where it would be like, we must say we must exclude these from our future conversations.
So, do you want further discussion as we move forward, or are you just kind of? if they
Some of
kind
them I had no problem with, some of them I wasn't sure, and some of them really, those two in particular really jumped out at me, so I would definitely think we need to discuss them more, but I guess all that is to say, I'm comfortable still having them advertised, but I
Yeah.
anticipate more conversation.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Me too.
So
Me three.
I want to make sure that I understand. If there is some area that had been proposed to be RB that I would like to make RA, would I be able to make that motion if we had advertised it as an RB use?
That is correct.
Okay.
And everything they proposed is upzoning.
Yes.
Okay.
So at this point, only if there was something on the map that collectively there was no interest in discussing, would you not want to include it
Okay.
as part of the advertisement?
Well, since we haven't had that discussion yet, I mean, I guess we could go through the specific changes, but I'm not sure that,
And the same for Plymouth Road, would be the situation.
That is true, yeah. So, anything that's currently on the map, leaving aside the planning commission's recommended changes, what's currently on the map, if it's currently at an RB or RC, and you would like to consider it at RA, then you would want to advertise it at RB or RC.
Right,
And then we could talk about
yeah.
R, A, B, and C.
Right.
Okay,
But if you wanted to consider RX3
yeah,
for that, you would need to, that decision would have to be made.
I
today.
don't think anyone here is thinking we want to increase density. We got it dialed pretty good, I think.
Yeah, we were.
Planning commission certainly can.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, this might be not the best term, but the planning commission kind of looked at the worst case scenario as far as density, and at least my position is that we, we can discuss it, down the road over the next, 60 days or so, but we should advertise their proposed changes. That's.
I agree with that.
I can agree with that. Is that, okay, can we do that?
So that's actually, Counselor Pereira, that's actually a very prudent course, because you can dial down, but you can't dial up. So if
Okay.
you start at that point, you're in
Yeah.
a good place.
Okay.
Now, I'll note, just for purposes of clarity, one of their there is one recommendation that is a down zone, or down, not a down zone, but a lowering in the proposed intensity, and that is relative to something we've already talked about, which is the corridor overlays, because
Mhm.
Right.
both of those require you first to lower the proposed intensity. And since they were recommending those, they also recommended the lowering, so we would exclude that. I think everyone understands that, but I just want to clarify that point. So the Preston Avenue proposal to lower the intensity on Preston Avenue would not be advertised. It would be advertised as the August published map shows, which is CX5 and CX8, understanding that that would be discussed further in the
Mhm.
context of the overlay district.
Okay.
Okay.
So I can say, I don't know of anything that I would want to do that would increase the intensity of the use over what the planning commission recommended.
Right.
If that's where everybody else is, then we can kind of move on from there.
I'm comfortable with that.
Realistically, I'm comfortable with that.
Vice Mayor Wade,
Yep,
you comfortable with that?
yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. So then we can come to the text changes as proposed by the planning commission. And again, it's the same question. Is there, given the length of the list, I'm just gonna ask it this way, is there anything on this list that anyone would not want to advertise? Let me highlight a couple of the important ones in here. One is the special exception process, which I think has been discussed amongst council and planning commission both. Again, if that's an idea that you guys would want to be able to consider, it needs to be in the advertisement. And that is special exemption is a discretionary review process for the purposes of changing physical dimensional standards.
But we need to give them different numbers. Remember that?
Oh, yes, they need to be renumbered.
Yeah.
When it's actually incorporated into the advertised ordinance, they will be renumbered, yes.
We had two section 15s.
Yes. And I apologize for that confusion.
Okay. That's why I thought maybe you were eliminating one and substituting the other. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I read through all of these and didn't see, they seemed like reasonable changes.
So one of the ones that jumped out at me, when I read through it, because I just need to spend more time with it, I couldn't figure out all the implications of the changes to historic preservation rules. Like, what, if any, implications are there for advertising what's there in terms of what we could or couldn't adjust?
That's an interesting question on the intensity scale. I'm not sure that it comes into play, right?
It's probably not gonna come into play. If it's a new concept that's being proposed, you need to advertise it, much like the new concept of RNA or corridor districts, but, it's not really an issue at all on the historic districts.
Okay.
Okay. I guess like the other things discussed, then it's fine to advertise, but I need to spend more time with it. At least for myself, I would say I would err on the side of not eliminating strength of preservation rules. Having read through it, I just couldn't figure out exactly what all the implications are, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And again, across the board, either the proposal from the planning commission is either kind of neutral on the question of intensity or represents an increase in intensity from which you guys would then be able to discuss and come down from if you so decided.
So another question is if there's things that aren't in here, the planning commission do it, would we need to, us as council need to add it before it is advertised? If, let's say, there was some small change related to environmental regulations or something like that?
Well,
If
we,
it's a new provision, I think that's the key difference, right? That's where you're about to go, Shannon. If it's brand new, so but if it's an existing provision that you wanna change the number on, say, or change something about it, then the question's gonna be, is the change more intense or less than intense than what's advertised?
And,
It may be best if you have an example, but
yeah, because I need to review it again myself to see if it even makes sense or how it's addressed. But one of them, for example, with environmental was in a portion of it, adding a discretionary decision point before we get to the larger review of floodplain regulations. So I'm assuming in that scenario, that would be less intensive and you would need it in there.
I think you'd be okay with the tweak that you're suggesting, with the ad. I think we'd be okay on that.
I
on
wanna
that
just make
issue.
sure.
I don't think that's going to, sorry.
No, but
I don't think that's getting us into, or we don't think that's getting us into intense, more intense, less
It's outside
intense, so I
of the-
think we'd be all right.
it's adding a discretionary review process related to development within the floodplain is what I'm hearing.
Correct.
Do we need to add that as a concept so that the concept can be considered in the ad?
I don't think it's gonna be an issue with advertising, but I think we told you before, we wanna err as much as possible on giving full public notice as to the concepts that are involved, so,
I think we want to play it safe and, because the way I'm looking at this, you've been involved with this for, you and Lloyd for a little bit longer than we have, and we kind of started off way out here, and as we get public input, we're kind of incorporating comments, and now we're narrowing it down, so, hopefully there's no, at this point, any, ideas that haven't been incorporated or considered or whatever in past, already, but if there is, I would rather us just incorporate it with the public hearing so that we have it covered, because, it's probably gonna get challenged anyway, we just don't wanna give them any low hanging fruit, so.
What was it specifically you wanted to change?
So I do need to go back to it to figure out the specific details, but the base of it would be until we get to the point where we do a larger comprehensive review of floodplain regulations as well as other environmental regulations, that there would be a discretionary decision point related to floodplain development in that interim. That's kind of the basic concept of it.
Parallel what we have for critical slopes,
Exactly.
I'm guessing. So
What I saw,
exemption.
what I saw in the text seems like a much more robust,
Those are our
So-
existing
The
regulations.
floodplain stuff is all our existing.
what was brought over into the,
Yeah.
okay.
And I know we've said months ago at this point, I know there was a presentation where they said, these are the deficiencies, we know we need to review it, but it's just not gonna happen on the same timeline, and for that reason, I would just err on the side of inserting a discretionary decision point until we get there, but.
So what I would ask, so we are aiming to produce this ordinance for advertisement as soon as possible. And so I'm anticipating that I wouldn't necessarily have an opportunity to bring that back before council, before we advertise it. So I guess what I'm asking for your indulgence on is that we craft something for inclusion that is modeled on the critical slope special exception process, and that we build it to maximize y'all's flexibility in terms of modifying it. The main thing is that we get a concept in there, and then we can modify it in deliberations post-advertisement.
To me, that seems sufficient.
That would work well from a legal standpoint.
Sounds good to me.
Then that's what we'll do.
Okay.
Keep it moving.
Did we reach a decision on the text changes from the planning commission?
I don't know that anybody had text changes that we would want to have that would require advertising beyond what planning commission has done. Certainly, I don't,
I don't.
yeah,
No.
I provided my feedback and you gave answers.
yeah,
Good.
okay.
Okay, so that is saying that we are going to advertise the proposal, the text changes from the planning commission, the recommendation of the planning commission on text is what we're gonna advertise. We're gonna advertise a. floodplain
Except for
description.
the 2.9.6 revision. The neighborhood, the RNA
Yeah.
core.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you, yeah. And, well, we're gonna advertise that
With
text,
the-
but not the map.
Well,
Sorry, what do we?
yeah,
Let's make
except
sure-
that you're not advertising the text to the extent that the
Yes.
text includes those specific descriptions.
Yes, yes, got it. We've added, so the next item we had for number 3 was any additional things. We've added one additional thing, a floodplain discretionary permit. Are there any other additional types of regulation, ideas, or anything else that we want to include within this draft for the purposes of you all being able to talk about it later?
Not that it strikes me.
So if we decide later to remove, for example, some commercial uses,
Yes,
that would count as making things less intense.
it would, yes. Commercial is always considered more intense than residential. You remove that use from a district, you can do that.
And we can do that without having to re-advertise, et cetera.
Yes, exactly, without having to re-advertise. Yeah.
Okay.
Give me a second, read through my notes, please.
Yeah.
And just to double check with the historic preservation rules, we feel comfortable because it's already in there.
Right,
Changes could be made in a variety of different ways.
to modify it, yeah, that's my.
In that case, I'm comfortable with that. I
Okay.
can't,
All right.
Are we ready to move on to number 4?
Yeah,
Give me 2 seconds, please.
Okay.
Michael, you made a point at one point about only exceeding 5 stories by SUP.
that's basically the structure of the
Wood building.
core neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
That's what that's about.
Correct, and then there's language even more broadly about special exception permits, which I think was, if we were to, anyway.
yeah.
And then clarifying and strengthening the IZ rules, so fraction of a unit going into a fund versus, is that something we still have?
Those are changes we can make within the context of the ad, because the advertisement already carries the ADU ordinance as a concept is there, and so then that's a,
And the text
Steve,
changed also included the piece about affordability, not just for renters, but also for homeowners.
that was
Yeah.
included in the text that came from the planning commission, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to clarify, just so that we're clear, the corridor overlay district as proposed is using a special exception process as opposed to SUP process. The key difference there is special use permit is for uses, the special exception is for any dimensional standard, and adding stories is a dimensional standard.
So to help me understand it,
Yeah, yeah,
there's SUPs as we use them now,
Yeah.
and basically the current draft special exception would cover part of how we use it now, and then there'll be an additional SUP process that is strictly use-based.
special use permits are only for uses, so let's take, well, as was proposed in the text, commercial uses in the residential districts require a special use permit. Goes to the planning commission, goes to city council, requires a public hearing. The special exception process is very, very similar. It's used for any dimensional standard, including in the instance of that corridor overlay stories. As written, the special exception process includes going to planning commission and city council. It does not include a dedicated public hearing.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, all that's understood, that sounds good to me, and I think, to me, it seems sufficient that the special exception process is outlined in there, and it's up to us, I guess, to discuss the extent or not that it's used, but it seems sufficient that it's kind of outlined in there.
Okay.
So right now, we get special use permit applications, like I'm thinking of the one that we've been getting a lot of email on recently about the Verve project, that include, one of the things they're asking for is a change in the dimensional requirements, so giving them more stories, for example. So they would have to get both a special use permit and a special exception permit?
Not under the new ordinance, they would be strictly in the special exception category because those uses are all allowed by right. We're trying to clarify it
I
and
see.
and
Okay.
distinguish between the two. And under our current zoning ordinance, you can only request a variation on the dimensional standards if you're already getting an SUP. So we've had some projects ask for SUPs that they don't necessarily need so that they can get a dimensional waiver over here.
Uh-huh.
So this is separating those two concepts out and treating them differently. So in the Verve's case, leaving aside the many aspects of that are not consistent with the zoning.
Right.
But from a strictly use perspective, it would be by right of the use, but if they wanted to vary a dimensional standard, they would need to seek a special exception.
So, under present analysis, we have, when we're talking about SUPs, we'll often be asked to approve a more intense use, i.e. more units per acre. But under this new ordinance, are we still dealing with that?
We don't have there's not a density component.
Yeah, okay.
Density is embodied within the dimensional standards.
Okay,
But someone wanted to go to 5 stories to 10, we would
It's a
get
dimensional standard, and it would be a special exception process within that
Mhm.
corridor overlay.
and it would still require going to planning commission, going to city council,
Yeah.
same as before.
Right. What I want to clarify actually on the point you just made, if, leaving aside the special, outside of the corridor proposal, the special exception process is not designed to increase height. It's that, otherwise, we would want to do that through a rezoning process, because our zoning districts are height-based, right? CX3, CX5. Outside of the corridor, if you want that proposed corridor overlay, if you wanted to increase your height from 3 stories to 5 stories, you would need to seek a rezoning.
But if you want to take advantage of one of the bonuses that's already written in,
Yes,
that does not require a special use or a special exception permit?
correct.
That you would handle essentially administratively?
Administratively through and those bonuses are structured through the affordable dwelling unit ordinance.
And is that something that would, I mean, if somebody, like, if a neighbor said, I don't want this 5-story building to go to 7 stories next door to me, and but you go ahead and you approve it anyway, is that going to be appealable to planning commission or council?
No, that would be by right, that is not an appealable
Okay.
decision.
Okay,
One variation on that. If the neighbor believes that the zoning administrator has not properly applied the ordinance by granting the additional stories, then the neighbor could conceivably, if they can demonstrate they're a aggrieved party, appeal it to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
And who do they make that, have to convince of that? The BZA?
BZA. Yes.
all right.
Council, was there anything else that you,
No, I mean, I feel like we're at a point where we're down at number 4, right?
yep.
Good.
So number 4 is responsive to emails that we saw relative to deeper discussions the council wished to have on various topics. We just wanted to capture those list of
Mhm.
topics, see if there's anything else, so that we can start to structure these into meetings and preparing materials for sub-meetings.
So I had asked specifically, because the RNA proposal, I went to the meeting last week and had no idea
Yeah.
that was coming and didn't have a copy of it and didn't have any, it's sort of new, and I'm sure it was new to the other counselors as well when they got it. And I had asked you specifically, was there some sort of a memo that I had missed or something? And you said no, but maybe we could do one.
Yep.
Is that something that, if we're looking at another meeting where you would produce the memo,
Yeah.
we could read that? Okay.
Yep.
Is it therefore not really worth discussing more right now, but let's discuss it after we've gotten your memo?
Seems
I don't want to
simple
stifle
enough.
anybody, but,
I
also
mean-
I don't want to waste time.
I'm happy to do it either way. I'm happy to discuss it further tonight, or
I'd say if
dedicate
it's
some
okay
time
with
to
y'all,
it.
just like a quick synopsis of what it is, as well as the core districts,
That's fine.
core,
If you're,
core corridors.
yeah.
I mean,
Core neighborhood district. is
There's
what
the
it
core
says.
neighborhoods, and then there's these corridors.
Yep.
Preston and Cherry corridor.
and I kind of did a synopsis at the beginning of the meeting, and that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
kind of the
Okay.
synopsis I can do.
Can you say that one more time?
I can.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so the RNA is basically an alternative RA district. It takes the base dwelling units down to one per lot. It creates a bonus for the preservation of existing structures of up to 3 units, so 2 additional units. Again, that's targeted towards the notion of still allowing accessory units to be on
And to
these
prevent
parcels.
tear downs.
Yeah, that's built into there as well. And then there's this matches the RA district. The bonus for affordable dwelling units gets you up to 6 units if all of the bonus units are affordable. And then there's reductions in the building massing that's allowed, primarily through controlling the lot coverage and the building footprint. And I think that pretty much sums it up.
So
We
that's-
did also reduce the building width in this district.
So that's essentially the planning commission's response to the whole sensitive areas conversation that's been
Yep.
going on for 18 months.
Yep, and this is largely consistent with what was originally proposed. The biggest difference is in the mapped area, that those mapped areas have been further refined.
The whole notion of if and only if you can do more units if you keep the first one,
Yeah,
the existing.
right.
Yeah.
So one of the main concerns that I heard, at least from folks in the neighborhood, about the notion of the sensitive areas, was that you are essentially saying everybody else in the city, except the people in the sensitive areas, is free to try to maximize their wealth, but you are limiting our ability to take wealth out of this property that's been in our family. How does this version of things get around that or meet that objection?
I don't think it gets around that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's an increase above the current density allowances, but
But only-
there's no way around that tension, like, completely.
And that increase is conditional, right, on preserving the existing building.
Correct.
Which doesn't exist in the straight-up RA district.
Correct. Yeah, it's tension, there's, and uncertainty. I have no idea if it's accurate. I've heard people criticize the proposal, saying it could actually make the lots more expensive because people would wanna, look there for single-family
Mhm.
homes. I think we can't have certainty how it would even play out.
I think that is a real challenge, and it's why, I mean, if I'm fairly frank, it's why we did not, at the end of the day, propose this district initially, and it's come back into the conversation because of that uncertainty and because of the concerns about how it would, how it comparatively plays out with other neighborhoods.
So we know from the RKG analysis
Yeah.
that if we don't do something like that, it's all gonna be turned over.
Mhm.
Correct. I agree, and in terms of, in a situation of uncertainty where we fall, I side on the line of this kind of proposal, just because of that data about rate of change and the number of parcels increasing in value by over 50%. But I just do acknowledge we're operating in an environment of true uncertainty.
Right, and that's where I was, the uncertainty until we got the RKG study, where essentially the way I saw that presentation is that they're looking at this through the lens of a developer, like how would they look at it?
I do want to clarify a point that it was in the things that Kyle said, but he said that the numbers he was presenting were the maximum that a developer could offer to buy the parcel and still have a profitable project at the end. Obviously, it's gonna be in the developer's interest to offer as little as possible. So it doesn't mean that every project is, that every parcel's gonna get that high offer. That's just the maximum offer that's possible. When we look at the UCLA report that we referenced for you all, one of the things that talks about is that the more you the more parcels that are made eligible for this type of development, the more competition there is, the more that a developer can go to one parcel and say, oh, you're asking too much, I can go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've got choice, as opposed to when you limit the area that is effectively upzoned, you essentially introduce a monopoly-type characteristics to that land area.
Although if you look even just geographically, even still, the vast majority of the city
Right,
is introducing that type of thing.
right. But
I get what you're saying. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah,
Right. the main point I want to make is that's the max offer and still have a feasible project, as opposed to the number that people are going to offer.
Well, and also because it will also vary lot by lot as to just how appropriate that individual lot is actually for that use.
Absolutely right.
Okay.
Do we, well, I'll hold that for later.
And I appreciate that all I did was introduce a greater degree of uncertainty. And I
No,
apologize.
no.
A developer's not gonna develop if he's not gonna make any money. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's why you're a developer.
It is interesting how wide-ranging this is. It's more than just Tenth and Page, it goes all the way down the street.
Well, absolutely. We were looking at, 10th and Page, Rose Hill, Ridge Street, Fifeville. It's a range of neighborhoods that are identified for inclusion in this.
And I'll just say, I guess, it's time for a deeper discussion later on. To me, the ultimate goal would be particularly looking at, again, areas with a high percentage of renters without subsidies. And that's really kind of the ultimate goal. And I know it's kind of impossible to get that exactly. But to me, that's kind of the goal. I certainly think, for example, our existing mobile home parks fall in that situation, a few other areas, but to me, it's more kind of like, if you would get it perfect, that narrowly tailored.
Could you say a little more about the corridor piece and where
Yeah.
that came about? And Michael might can add to that too.
Yeah, so the corridor piece is kind of the corollary where it recognizes that these adjacent commercial corridors serve a role that's kind of part of the environment associated with these neighborhoods. It's where theoretically people shop. It's where the amenities, cultural aspects and stuff like that would exist. And so what we're basically asking for is, in order to get to a higher density, we're asking an applicant to provide a minimum of 2 benefits from the lists that are identified. And those include a greater degree of affordable housing. They include affordable commercial space for a range of specific uses that would be essentially, for lack of a better word, useful to the neighborhood. So it's grocers, laundromat, banking, so on and so forth. Job training was on that list. Community gathering spaces, whether those are indoors or outdoors. So it was a range of community benefits, all things that have been contemplated in various conversations that have happened around individual
And
projects.
there's a level of discretion on our part about whether
Yeah,
this counts or not as a,
there is. Yeah, I mean, it's built, I mean, in providing that list, one of the things we're trying to do is combat the uncertainty, the unpredictability principle by trying to at least prime a list of things to incorporate. I'd also note that the district requires a public meeting. The idea that we can't force people to talk to the neighborhood, but we can at least force them to have a community meeting from which they can glean a list of what are the benefits that the neighborhood might want to see.
Yeah, and just, I mean, my thinking on it, and like the other things, this is an area where there's legitimate uncertainty and trade-offs, and the trade-off is obviously do you artificially suppress the supply of new apartment units, either because the discretionary process introduces more time and uncertainty, or council just says no to all of them. The flip side of that, and my thinking is, you look at, for example, like the UCLA study, that's looking at residential changes, I think up to 8 units. Research on just mixed-use corridor changes is different. There's a different dynamic, and, for example, like, you have a situation like Reed's Market, if you're looking at the level of density and height change versus the by right allowance, that's just a dramatic change in the value of the lot. To me, there's uncertainty about the impact on existing businesses. There's uncertainty about what mix of student apartments versus non-apartment office uses come in. And it's just kind of the speed and scale at which we want to see that change happen as mixed-use corridors. And to me, particularly in some areas, I just feel more comfortable siding on the cautionary side of giving ourselves and the people in this community more opportunity to see and make their voice heard about what comes in. But I acknowledge, there's a trade-off there.
So I was looking at the corridor provision and thinking that was the Michael Payne amendment, because it gets at, to some extent, the specific concern that you had about the tall buildings immediately adjacent to 10th and Page, for example. Do you feel that helps in that concern at all, or am I misreading the situation?
I think the framework does. I think there's some discussion around like what locations it was. I know the Planning Commission had different ideas even on Preston and Cherry, what the exact geographic boundaries will be. To me, there's still other areas I look at the scale of change in terms of like alignment with Rivanna River Urban Corridor Plan. And to me, I mean, part of it is height for sure, but it's also just the by right increase in height with unlimited density above a certain amount will just create a fundamental change, more so than the built character, but the local business environment and what kind of businesses we're likely to see come in. And we may want to have that happen, but to me,
You
it's just
thinking
an
like around
acknowledgement.
East High, is that what you're?
Particularly the I think, I can't remember if they were CX, NX8, or adjacent to where that is. I mean, that's a whole nother thing we can get into, but later on. But yes, in short, the framework, I think, addresses the concern. Even if there's more discussion, we'll probably have.
Okay.
So from Rosser Avenue to the railroad right away on Preston, and Cherry from Roosevelt Round Boulevard to Fifth Street.
Correct. And again, a conversation there is I could be wrong, but like Reed's Market's not included. If you increase the by right height on that lot to 8 stories with unlimited density, you are gonna see an overnight massive increase in the valuation of that lot. And you're probably greatly increasing the chance that if there's a local business there that does not own the land, that business will be no more in a period of a couple of years.
And you don't want that to happen. If you can
It's
avoid
trade-off. I
it.
mean, you can make the argument maybe the business is gonna go away anyway, so,
But
but
you don't have any way of knowing that. See, that's the whole thing,
Sounds
the
like you're-
uncertainty.
Sounds like you're suggesting go all the way to Ridge McIntyre.
we can discuss that later on.
Or at least to the railroad spur.
Well, I'll say philosophically, to me, I am comfortable with an approach that is saying we're not saying we're never gonna get or never allow a certain height in those corridors, but to me, still having some equivalent of our SUP processes now, I think, to me, I feel more comfortable with both giving us and the community more of a chance to see what kind of stuff we're getting, what the impact is. And to me, that's not saying the future of those corridors is still not gonna be thinking 10 years from now, 8-story buildings. But it is kind of a slowing down of that process.
But if it is 8 stories, 5 or 10 years down the line, council and the neighbors or the business owners would have had an opportunity to speak. It wouldn't be like they're not even there.
Correct. And again, I feel like with the type of developers coming in on those projects, Part of the trade-off is, I'm sure, I think you referenced like 7% on average is the increase in cost from a discretionary process, but when I look at the scale and type of developers, at least, over the next 2 years until we review our comp plan again, I can kind of live with that trade-off, and I feel like they feel that impact less than, a small or mid-sized developer. But
Okay.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna be looking at the numbers that we saw and the type of development and type of retail development and offerings that we get. Wasn't it 123 was the medium income that it was?
The area median income is increased to
123.
123,
Yeah. Yes, that's a lot of income, and so they're gonna be able to say, well, we can put in a higher-end store because we can charge more, and maybe we can pay for more, but that type of thing, so. I wasn't sure if that discussion was for all of these bullets, or y'all were just kind of talking
Just
on
going
a
yeah.
few.
Just the first bullet.
Just
First,
4A.
okay,
Do we
all
have
right,
more-
that's fine,
Do we have more discussion on 4A?
No.
Okay. 4B, I had specifically requested that we talk about this in part because I didn't understand it the first time Module 1 came out, and I don't know whether it still applies and what still applies.
Right.
This question of sublots, lot sizes, development potential through subdivisions, things like that. Now, preface this by saying the first time that I really had to sort of wrap my mind around it was when somebody told me that in theory you could take, if you're looking at 2,500 square foot lot sizes, and you look at the 40 lots that are between Meadowbrook Heights Road and Melbourne on Grove Road, there are 40 lots, 40 houses there. But at 2,500 square feet, you could put in 313 2,500 square foot lots. And therefore, they concluded you could have 313 houses or 313 apartment complexes even. And that's when you introduced me to the concept of, well, the critical variable there really is the road frontage.
Required
And
frontage.
no, that can't happen, which helped reassure me, but it didn't help me as I tried to explain to people who were asking me what the concept is of a sublot and the purpose of the lot sizes and so on. So one of the things I had specifically asked was, talk us through how these sort of scary scenarios aren't really gonna happen.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think I wanna try and do that all the way tonight, but I think that's a topic we can discuss in detail. I do wanna continue to clarify the point that sublots do not get you any additional density, right? So while a sublot goes through a subdivision allows you to create new lots, and if you're in an RB district, each of those lots can have up to 6 units, right? The sublot concept goes through a subdivision process, but it creates lots within one of those lots that I can then put my 6 units on individual parcels. I cannot take one of those sublots and then put 6 units on it alone. So all the rules that apply to the lot as a whole still apply to the lot as a whole, inclusive of those sublots. So my lot coverage does not go up. So if my approach is that I want to produce 6 cottages, if I'm proposing a cottage court type
So-called
development.
tiny house development.
Tiny house development, cottage court, around a little central green, it's very pretty. I could do that by right as a rental project without ever introducing the concept of sublots. What we're trying to do with sublots is create the opportunity that someone could easily do that as an ownership project by putting each one of those cottages on an individual lot. But I still can't do more than 6, and I still can't increase the lot coverage on that lot by anything further than what's allowed.
I don't understand when you can't increase the lot coverage.
So the district allows a certain, allows the buildings to cover a certain amount of lot.
60%
I can put,
or something.
right, I can put that
For
lot
some of the
coverage
area.
in one building, or
yeah.
I can put it in a set of 6.
Yeah,
So what you explained it to me the other day, so say you've got a 7,500 square foot, RA is 2,500?
No,
6,000.
RA is 6,000.
So you've got an 18,000 square foot. I don't know, some of these ones on Rugby Avenue, how big are they?
At least that.
Yeah. So you have one like that, and you could subdivide, you could buy that lot and you could subdivide it into 3 new lots,
Subject to the issue of frontage.
subject to the issue of frontage. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to you'd have those 3 lots, and then you'd have to have a road that went in,
You'd have to either have existing frontage or create new frontage.
or create new frontage. And that new frontage would be like a right-of-way or something, or an easement on those 3 lots.
It would be a right-of-way, and have to meet all the right-of-way standards for the city, including, you know, if it's not connecting up to anything and doesn't have the potential to connect up to anything, at the end of it, it's gotta have a big cul-de-sac.
So if this table is a narrow lot
Right,
that we'll say is 18,000 square feet,
right,
and you can divide it into thirds,
right.
then one strip here, unless you build a road from here to here, you can only really build on this front part.
Right, well, you can only build subject to the amount of frontage. You can't, you wouldn't be able to further subdivide it because you wouldn't have sufficient
I wouldn't
frontage.
be able, okay, but then I build a road through here, and that lets me have appropriate frontage on each 3 of these.
Right.
And I could, subject to, I could build 6 units or whatever here, here, and here,
So I'm-
potentially.
As long as you have sufficient frontage on the main street to meet the frontage requirement of your first lot,
Uh-huh.
as well as the width of that, the required width of that right-of-way.
Right, right, so practically speaking, it's gonna be limited in terms of how much housing can be back there.
Right,
Right.
because that road is going to have to
Yeah,
take
that-
up some of
some
the
of that
lot
space,
size,
right.
you know.
You're
yeah.
basically taking that and you're turning it into like a little mini community is what you're having to do by adding a road and,
And so I assume the cul-de-sac is so that fire apparatus and things
Turn
like that.
around at the end, right. Unless there's an
And you-
opportunity to connect through, and then you can
And
do
if you-
a stub
yeah.
street or something, but
and so this first lot here, you could have, say, 6 houses on it. And you rent those. And then the next one, you could have 6, but then you would divide that lot into sublots and sell them off if you chose to, if you wanted to give people a home ownership option.
Right.
But it's not like each sublot could themselves sort of
Right.
expand again.
Need to 6 more.
Yeah,
Right,
like-
exactly.
Like in Harry Potter, the gold and the,
This is fractal geometry.
yeah.
So,
Anyway, so I don't know if that helps. Is that a
So-
memo? Does that equal a memo?
well, the,
Because it really comes down to looking at it on a piece of board and
Yeah.
saying, you know,
the other point that we've sort of come back around to occasionally is that there are a number of places in the city of Charlottesville where zoning, where deed restrictions prohibit further subdivision.
Correct.
And just as an example, and I've used this example before, most of Greenbrier is governed by subdivision restrictions that were put in place back in the late 1950s, 1960s. And whereas some of the restrictions, for example, the restriction on single-family only use expired through, because they had a 25 or 35-year lifespan to them, that's the no subdivision requirement in most cases, I believe, still persists. And in that case, you would not be able to create any additional ownership opportunities on those lots, whether you're talking subdivision or sublot or whatever all else. There's going to be one owner, or one, I suppose you, well, I don't
Now, the
know.
only question would be condos.
Yeah, you
right?
could do condos, I guess.
so in practicality, excuse me, my voice.
Yeah.
In practicality, what that's gonna mean is a lot of places that are really worried about this, it ain't gonna happen
Right.
because of the deed restrictions.
I have tried to tell folks that, but I want to have somebody else other than me say that to make clear. Okay. So,
What does C mean, affordable housing in residential districts?
okay, what I had in mind there is this. when we got the first draft of Module 1, it called for the bonuses for affordable housing. If you build an entirely affordable housing development in an RA zone, for example, you could go from 3 to 6 units, or RB up to 8, RC up to 12. The reality was that I think everybody agreed that you would never get anything built at that point unless the city was going to heavily subsidize each one of those units, and we weren't likely to subsidize a private developer doing it, though we might consider subsidizing PHA or a CRHA or Habitat or somebody. And so I had come to the conclusion 6 months ago that that kind of bonus situation simply was never going to get built. The second version of things is a little bit different in that you would still, let's say in an RA zone, if I'm getting this correct, the first 3 units could still be market rate units. Even the fourth one could be a market rate if it was done by preserving the original building, or at least most of it. And then, but then, what, the additional 2 would have to be affordable.
Correct.
And my question is, as we look at the rules for RA, RB, and RC, how are we gonna get any affordable housing as a practical matter? How is that gonna happen? Are we going to have somebody trying to sell off the back end of the lot to Habitat to build 2 units on, or 4 units, or 8, however many units, recognizing that in some of these places, you wouldn't be able to sell it off because of the deed restrictions. And so this is I want to have a way of encouraging affordable housing in those residential districts that's going to work. And I don't want to end up going to the mat over things that aren't going to work. And so I want to make sure that whatever we're coming up with is going to work.
And I guess the strongest argument I've heard is both, all our affordable housing providers, CRHA, PHA, Habitat, Land Trust, all seem to feel very strongly, I guess in their existing model, obviously lot acquisition is a big part of it, eventually they develop it. It could be the kind of partnership you mentioned, it could be on the open market, and in conversation with them, what they've said is they strongly believe this will help give them, more of a competitive edge to purchase a lot in competition with the private market. And they seem to believe it's a meaningful part of allowing them to expand that kind of model of their work. I don't know if that was clear or makes sense, but in part to me, that's a strong reason I feel like including it would make sense. I agree, it's not gonna be like all over the place all the time, but it's certainly a part of their existing work. And I think it's a positive thing, and quite frankly, I think whether we include or remove it, it's not going to address the core concern that people have, which is the buy right market increase in density. I think that's really the core issue at hand, whether this was in there or not. So to me, it feels like removing it is just making it, harder for our affordable housing providers without actually quelling the core concerns of the people who don't want to see RB or RC in their neighborhood. But that's my perspective.
So, Lloyd, what you were saying before about the affordable lots, the last 2 lots potentially being affordable, and maybe they could sell them off. We had a discussion about that we require the first lot be affordable.
First unit.
Yeah. So, because otherwise they'll just go up to the line and not do that extra one. It was like, because without mentioning those partners, PHA and others, no one's really gonna get into this where we have a big impact like, Friendship Court, where you get several hundred units or 40, 50 at a time. That is where we're gonna have the deep impact. Not that we shouldn't do this because that one or two here and there, that's gonna add up, but,
What's the risk in keeping it? Beyond just people getting upset,
Well,
which I'm not dismissing
Yeah.
people that are upset, but I.
As a general proposition, I don't like to have unnecessary political fights. If it's a worthwhile fight, that's fine. If it's gonna accomplish something, that's fine. If it's not gonna accomplish something and just gets everybody ticked off, then I kinda wonder why we're doing it. And my question for the affordable housing folks is basically, tell me how you would actually make this work in practice. And I haven't had the full discussion with Dan and Sunshine that I had one with them, 6-8 months ago, where they basically said, no, that's, we got some problems with the way that would be working. And I'd really like to know more, and maybe I'll have to have that discussion with them, but I was hoping maybe staff here had some specific suggestions.
I'm not gonna say so tonight,
Okay.
but we could certainly, we could dig into this further we could establish this as a topic for one of your upcoming work sessions. And I might have our economists see if they can run some numbers to explore kind of what are the parameters of feasibility here. So we can do
Yeah.
that.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I'm inclined to keep it personally.
you
For
said
the
you're
reasons that
inclined to keep
Michael-
it.
I'm inclined to keep it for the reasons Michael mentioned. Is this the same item D?
No, the item D deals with the question that I know it's been discussed a little bit about how the
Oh,
the
the
density
stretch.
bonus to go to 7 stories doesn't help because nobody's gonna wanna suddenly break
Because of the
into steel and concrete construction.
Except for luxury apartments.
Yeah.
Except for
Students.
student housing where there's a higher degree of revenue.
And I wanted to have that discussion as a unit,
Probably best to kind of, C, D, and E may be one that we can come back to all together.
Okay.
And E is from a message from Counselor Pinkston, just about understanding the ADU manual itself, which is important. You guys will have to adopt that as well.
okay?
We probably won't do it, we'll probably do it following the ordinance itself, so that we know exactly, it's an implementation document. We want to know exactly what we're implementing, and before we finalize it.
So just for my clarifications, ADU affordable
It's
or
affordable.
accessory?
Affordable dwelling units.
Okay.
Yeah.
In this,
Not to be confused with accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, that's what,
in this book, it's affordable.
yes.
Well, that's derived from state law, so.
Oh.
The state calls it affordable dwelling units, so we call it affordable dwelling
Have to,
units.
not act to.
One question, if you want to put this off to future, that's fine, but I know in the planning commission's conversations, one of the things that came up is with the height bonus. What is there to stop them from doing like 1 or 2 units? What was,
That was addressed in here.
what was that change that addressed it?
The proposal was to say that if you're getting the height bonus, the project has to be a minimum of 40% residential.
Okay,
So the concern was that someone could do a hotel, throw a single affordable unit on top or at the bottom or wherever,
Mhm.
and they could get a height bonus.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so this is saying that at least 40% is going to have to be distinctly residential as opposed to some other commercial application.
Exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
so those 3 things we'll talk about more.
Yeah, we'll call that
Systematically.
we'll call that a meeting.
Okay. The next issue characterized here is planning for walkable neighborhoods. This is something that I've talked about a couple different times, and I wanted to make sure that we talk about it as a group. That is that the general notion of walkable neighborhoods, the summary of districts, section 2.2.1, talks about the purpose being a walkable neighborhood environment intended to accommodate a variety of housing options, including single-unit homes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and small apartments in general residential and medium-intensity residential areas designated in the comprehensive plan, supporting and within walking distance of neighborhood serving retail, food, and service uses. And my concern has been that And this relates to the one below it, commercial uses in residential districts. My concern is this, that we know, I'm not sure we know the number, but we understand the general concept of a neighborhood commercial use as requiring a certain amount of density around that use, so that it's not a use where people are driving, where everybody's driving to it. That if everybody's driving to it, it's not fulfilling its function as a neighborhood commercial use. I saw some research when we were talking about commercial, mixed-use nodes and neighborhood nodes and so on a year or two ago, that said that you had to have a density within about a 0.7 mile radius of the site. It had to be a certain kind of density, and my concern is that there are very few areas in Charlottesville that have that degree of density, or are likely to have that degree of density in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Certainly don't have it now. And so my question, again, so if we end up with a commercial use, let's say somebody gets the idea that they want to do one of these so-called neighborhood commercial uses, but the neighborhood won't support it, and the only way they have of making money is to basically have folks coming in and driving in, and there's no parking lot that we're requiring, and it basically, it becomes, because of the economics of it, at least at this point, it becomes a real problem for the neighborhood, not an opportunity for the neighborhood. And so that has led me to think that what we need to do, if we want to say the walkable city is our neighborhood, or walkable neighborhood is our goal for 2050, but we don't have to have that goal by 2030, and we won't have it by 2030, then maybe what we want to do is to get started on that by working on the density piece first, before we start adding in the commercial uses that we can reasonably expect are not going to be neighborhood commercial uses for many, many years, if they're built at all. And again, this gets back to my point of why have a political battle that we don't need, and that in some cases would get us, would be very, if implemented, would be very unsuccessful. And so my thought was, let's acknowledge that we've got a long-term goal. The long-term goal, which we've already declared for 2050, is carbon neutrality. The way we're going to get there is dealing with transportation issues and a lot of other things, but we're not going to get there right now. Let's start down that path by working on the density piece, recognizing that there may be some areas in Charlottesville where there is some greater degree of density, where we can talk about density and neighborhood commercial in an intentional kind of a way, but that there are significant portions of the city that do not qualify for that and will not qualify for that anytime in the near future. And then recognize that that may be a change that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, somebody's going to have to make. We know that we are required by law to have a comp plan review every 5 years. Every 5 years, we're going to have to look at this kind of thing again. And my thinking on it is that we ought to set it up so that we're going to have that thinking reviewed every 5 years, but that we don't have to write the ordinance today in 2023 that will take us without change to 2050.
So are you talking specifically about the commercial piece, or also
Yes.
in medium intensity?
I'm talking specifically right now about the commercial piece.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and say this about the commercial side of things. I mean, we had James and I had a good conversation yesterday. It was very helpful, answered a lot of my questions. You know, one of the things that he pointed out is there's two ways to do this kind of planning. There's the sort of, you know, like we were trying to do a couple weeks ago, and had the Weldon Cooper in, more sort of a top-down engineering, logistical planning sort of, you know, this is how many people we expect to have, this is how many units we need to build, and that's valuable. The other way of doing it, as he called it, and this method is really more of a design method, like if we, and the metaphor he used was that of ecology or ecosystems. So the idea is by this sort of code that we're adopting, it allows positive change to occur somewhat organically, but with guardrails around it. Is that
Yes,
kind of
good.
correct?
Yeah.
So, and I get that, which is why I still support the medium intensity residential. The thing I'll say about the commercial is, I hear what people say about it, and I can see why it would be valuable. In as far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't bother me to have someone down the road from me who's got a side business out of their house. I wouldn't say this, maybe political is not the word that I would use. I think what you're trying to say is to minimize the divisiveness that's already present in our community because of.
I don't mean
this whole-
political as the Republicans and Democrats, but,
Right.
just,
Yeah, the community
The furor.
angst that's about this. And so for me, I would be willing to say pretty much, the commercial piece is not a hill I'm willing to die on for this whole thing. To me, this is something, the commercial, we could come back to in a year and say, at this point, we say, let's press pause on that. We're gonna do further study on what the commercial aspects of this look like. I mean, I understand the rationale for a lot of it, as I understand it years ago, particularly with black and brown communities. Their house was also the place that they worked because they couldn't afford to have two separate places, their home and there's people down the street from me that it looks like it's a similar situation. And they're working out of their home, and we do have, I think, robust rules in here about home occupations, and those are protected, and homestays are protected. But I don't see why we need to allow lodging, frankly. Maybe, Ron, you can help me with this since you're on the tourism board, but lodging in any of the residential districts, to me, is cutting against the purpose of having housing. Again, homestays, we need to keep homestays, but in terms of the commercial uses, again, I don't really have a problem with any of them, but I've spoken to enough people, and I feel like we're pushing this hard enough with the medium intensity and everything else we're doing, that if we delayed the commercial, say we needed more time to think about it, come back in a year or two in the comp plan, I would be willing to do that. And if that would be something that would just immediately kind of lower the temperature and let us focus on, like you said, the density side of things, I think that would be a wise way forward.
So we had talked about this at length a few meetings back where we looked at lots where it was gonna be 4,000 feet or feet or
2,500.
2,000 or whatever. And so I've been thinking this through like.
And bodegas, don't forget about the
Yes,
bodegas.
yes, New York. And,
Gotta have them.
yeah, and, someone, let's say we have the zoning, someone builds something, it's a little corner store. And there's not capacity right there in the neighborhood for people to walk there or maybe drop off on their way home, and they're like, well, we maybe have to expand our marketing to get some people that's maybe heading out of town, swing by, and there's pressure or parking, maybe they come to us. And so, if we don't have the capacity right now as far as, the neighborhoods, we build in the density, as we said, that, maybe in 5 or 10 years, we have them. I was trying to think of where that might work. We have some of those small stores and things, but of course, a lot of them right now are closed, because there's, I don't, I assume for whatever reasons that they've closed. And, so I think that, I too could live without the commercial. Goes against every grain in my planning body, but, if we, but that's, I think that we can, if we still talking about now advertising, what we're advertising,
We still advertise it.
right,
We
that
still
we
have-
can hear from it, but that's, that's kind of where I am right now, so,
So it sounds like you're thinking similar to me in terms of
yeah.
you'd be willing to trade that in for getting the medium intensity actual housing.
Yes.
Not to rehash our old conversation too much, but I I disagree. I think one, if we think about some of the areas, both in Charlottesville and any city people visit, some of the most iconic areas people like the most have residential and commercial. I mean, it's the basis of the most iconic planned area of the city, the downtown mall, downtown Belmont. So it's always struck me as odd that we love those areas. Everyone thinks of them as defining areas of city, and yet we say, we want the government to say that it's now illegal to ever do that. There's that component of it. You've also got corner stores in various areas of the community that people rely on, go to every day. And again, it strikes me as odd that we want to say the government would say, you absolutely cannot build that. There's no process by which to do it. I think if we were to see the biggest impact, you would probably look at areas, a corridor adjacent to neighborhoods where you allow commercial uses at, a height that's like similar to residential scale. That's a much bigger change. We're not talking, to me, that would be kind of the see where things go longer term. To me, the absolute smallest baby step is special use permits, which is what's in there. That is the baby step. It seems like we all agree that from a policy perspective, it's the smallest baby step that's helping us get there. And I think the core thing people are contesting is not wanting to see their neighborhood change to RB or RC, and saying that, okay, we took out a special use permit that you could pursue is not going to address that core concern they have. So I'm not sure that will be accomplished. And I mean, I'll acknowledge that, you're not gonna see it everywhere, but I mean, an example is this weekend, Habitat had a home dedication. There's a mom there who sells food at the farmer's market. Building Goodness Foundation agreed to convert the basement into an area that's equivalent to small kind of commercial scale cooking. And she wants to use her backyard to start a catering business. We're obviously not gonna see that everywhere all the time. That's gonna require partnership with Community Investment Collaborative and whatnot, but I just don't think we're gonna satisfy anybody by saying there's no process by which to do that, so.
So, yeah, I think that I would definitely support a special use permit process, because that will have a robust kind of community input process. I mean, you mentioned the downtown mall, and we don't, that's kind of ideal place, but it also draws people. I mean, you think the top 4 places that people come to this area to see is Rotunda, Monticello, UVA, wineries, and the downtown mall. And, I know the urban neighborhood would not be the downtown mall, but it is supposed to be for kind of the community, not for a tourism draw, and that's what the downtown mall is now.
Yeah, to me, the downtown mall is different than,
Yeah.
I get the fact that it is mixed use. but
Yeah, well,
It's not
that's the whole
like-
thing, but if you look at the original plans, the majority of it was housing. The city just never built that.
But the mall,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess,
The thing is about this, the issue of the special use permit is it's gonna be very hard legally to come up with rules that say, I mean, you can't say, well, we've got 2 on a block, we can't have 3.
Well, you
That's
can,
what-
you can vote based on adverse neighborhood impacts, and one of those would be concerns about traffic and as that relates to safety. That's my understanding.
That is-
yeah, we can't say, well, we already got 3 bodegas on this block, we can
That'd be
say.
impossible, because they're supposed to always be on the corner.
Not that many corners.
But if I may, so
Go right ahead.
you're exactly right. So the zoning ordinance, a special use permit process cannot be used to make economic decisions. But there may be health and safety concerns associated with traffic as a result of the addition of what is already there. But it's a bit of a sticky wicket, but those 2 principles are correct.
Yeah.
So it would not be permissible for us to say, you want to put a store there, we don't think there's enough density there, and therefore we don't think you're going to be able to do it by walk-up trade alone?
That's,
Go ahead.
That's a separate issue. You may recall years ago in Loudoun County, there was a Supreme Court case called Lerner, in which the court said, yes, you Loudoun can consider whether or not there is the capacity there for a shopping center. And because your comprehensive plan reflects that there are certain densities and those types of things. And the Supreme Court upheld that decision by the Board of Supervisors to say, basically, as I recollect, there weren't enough people there as the comp plan had anticipated for this particular type of use. That's different than saying, no, you can't have 3 bodegas. That because we don't think you have, you've got 1 bodega and there are, not enough people for 2. It's a fine line there and you have to be careful with it, but.
For example, you could have a situation like an application for a bodega that's on a very narrow street, and it required large commercial vehicles to make deliveries for what the bodega was selling, and that could create a traffic problem. Number one, a traffic problem. Number two, a health and safety issue because of the street conditions. So I agree with, obviously, everything that Sharon said. I'm trying to sort of get to the subtleties of this kind of an inquiry. And so I think, again, public health and safety, land use concerns that impact the use, perfectly acceptable. Picking economic winners and losers, subject to challenge with a significant risk.
Any thoughts, Madam Counselor?
I know it's a lot. It's, it limits in one way, but it limits in one way and it allows certain things to happen as it relates to convenience. And I think we have to be concerned about safety issues. Most of the places I know that have bodegas, there are not a lot of little people running around. So when you're talking about health and safety, you're talking about, foot traffic. So people with their dogs or people with the strollers or children going to the corner store to buy candy or whatever they're doing. So you're looking at a place that is going to bring in revenue, that is going to be convenient, and that revenue is a way of living for someone. I saw the unit that Michael is talking about because I viewed both of those Habitat homes before the people, moved in. It was the day before they were supposed to go to closing, and I thought it was really nice that there was an organization to help the family, the woman that owns the bakery. I think she does baked goods at the market. And, so that she can have that. And to say that she couldn't do that or someone else couldn't do that really limits that person and their ability to be able to be sufficient, self-sufficient. And I wouldn't want to see us closing that opportunity. So how do we do this so that we don't run into the health and safety issues, but still allowing people to have a source of income?
Yeah.
Isn't that person allowed to, bake her cakes or pies or whatever in her basement and then sell them at the market?
Yes.
And so what we would be doing now is saying she can sell them from her basement.
If I'm understanding what the ordinance is saying, if I'm understanding what the ordinance is saying, yes, it would allow that. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, Michael, about you don't think that's the rub. I think there's so much coming at, and I get, 40% of the folks here are homeowners, 60% are renters, or whatever the number is. I care about both, especially renters, because my daughters are renters. But I guess there is so much coming, so much that's entailed in this overall effort, that to me, if there's one thing we could just press pause on and say, we'll come back to it in a year, after we've had more time to let the dust settle, I think it would go a long way to demonstrating to people that are really angry about this whole thing and put out that, you know, we're not gonna shove all this down your throat. We're gonna, some things we feel strongly about, other things we're just gonna give it some time. So that's,
Okay, well,
I don't have a problem.
We don't have to take a vote at this point. but
Right.
It's useful to have this discussion in some detail. The next thing on this list was a review of the zoning map. I guess that's the stuff we're gonna have to deal with.
I think that's a
next time.
meeting topic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
what
And
do you
then
mean by
parking.
that?
I mean,
You can go,
going through the map and identifying, are these places where the proposed zoning is this, and we prefer that it was this?
You mean this?
Yeah, the overall
No.
zoning map.
Mhm.
Basically, this is the thing that I thought council should have done 2 years ago and didn't. And I want to have I want to have a meeting where we can say to every property owner whose property has been zoned to now or put in, RC or something else, or whose neighbor's property is being put there, that we have looked at it and thought about it individually and not just sort of washed our hands of it and let it go.
and I hear you, and I have, I've driven around to 85–90% of the RB and RC. Are you contemplating in this meeting us going around?
That turns out to have been logistically too difficult to
But I mean,
arrange.
in the meeting, are you talking about, okay, we're gonna go this quadrant, this, or is it more like bring to the meeting things that you have concerns about?
In my view, it's more bring to the
Okay.
meeting things you have concerns about. And I would also want to, I haven't thought about it in exactly scripting it out, but I would want to have some affirmative discussion by council of the places that we are upzoning more significantly than we're upzoning the rest of the city. And if that means that we decide, yes, the plan for RB makes sense, yes, the plan for RC makes sense, that's fine. One of the reasons that I've said, I want to have the discussion of the definitions of what will be permissible there first. And then, once we've defined exactly what's gonna happen in our ARBRC, then we can say, this is a parcel that is appropriate for that, or this is a neighborhood that's appropriate for that. We've all been lobbied by the folks on Plymouth Road, and that's a discussion that we can have. I just got another very detailed memo from them today about all of that. But that's a discussion that would be a lot more useful to have after we've finally decided on what our ground rules are gonna be. So I've looked at that as sort of the end of the process kind of a thing, once we've fixed the text.
Okay.
So the last thing on this list is parking.
And this was responsive to comments that I saw from you, Councilor Pinkston. And what I'm noting here is that we recognize that one of the things that we have to do in removing minimum parking requirements from zoning, that's not washing the hands of the city from responsibility and looking at the issue of parking. On-street parking is in fact the most effective way of managing the issues that rule is otherwise meant to do, right? Spillover parking is far more effectively addressed through on-street parking regulation. And we are in the process of putting together a proposal that looks at our parking, looks at our overall parking management program, so that we can bring that back to council. That's inclusive of changes to our parking ordinance that governs street parking.
Would that happen after this is adopted, practically speaking?
Practically speaking, it would be completed after this is adopted, but happy to bring forward
Sort of the concept?
the concepts and outline of where that's going.
One of the thoughts, and I knocked on a lot of doors 4 years ago, and some of the doors I knocked on were people who lived down in the Fightsville area and near the university, where They're getting a lot of parking from people who were working construction on the new hospital add-on and so on. And one of their concerns was that, and people were saying, well, just go ahead and have permit parking. But apparently, our ordinance is written so that only the landowner can request parking, permit parking, and that the tenants can't. And so the people who are actually affected by the problem have no ability under our present ordinance to ask for the city's help.
Yeah.
Is that something we can fix?
Yeah, we have to look at the ordinance. I think the ordinance, is due for a rewrite, and we need to look at kind of what are the options in an overall program.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, and I always bring this up, I was just in Northern Virginia this weekend, that with these parking minimum is just gonna flood the side streets. I mean, people will, look like they'll walk several blocks, from where they live to park their second or third car, because, where this part is tied into our, our transit studies and things, because right now we don't have that robust transit service that we need, where people can use that, or say, okay, well, I don't need a second car or a car type of thing. So I just think if we don't do this, we're gonna, open up to people just starting to park, blocks away, impacting other neighborhoods because they have park,
We still have to manage our streets at the end of the day. Right. And that's what we want to talk about in this.
I'm curious, I assume there must be, if there's existing data about cities that eliminated parking minimums and how the market responded, because one of the questions, quite frankly, my assumption is the market will still probably usually build a similar amount of parking.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if there's data that backs that up, or if other cities have seen a different experience. Because I would definitely concur, I mean, there's neighborhoods like 10th and Page, areas of Belmont where parking's already strained, people want permit parking, and, that's not gonna go away.
Right. So that's exactly what the data shows. So the best example, and the folks that have done the most data collection and tracking of this is Buffalo, which eliminated minimum parking requirements back in, I believe, 2017. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere in that era. And so they've had a number of years now of experience, and what they found is that 90% of the projects have come in and they're providing the exact same amount of parking that they were providing before. Where they've seen a differentiation, where they've seen the value, is in downtown parcels that were not previously considered developable because of their parking requirement, or buildings that were effectively not occupiable because of the parking requirement. Those are coming online because in those places, the developer is making the decision to not provide parking and is then able to build on a lot that was otherwise not developable. And downtown Buffalo has transit and walkability and all that stuff. Now, and notably, remember, the city of Charlottesville has already removed the minimum parking requirement from our downtown. So we've already seen that benefit within our downtown, but we haven't actually seen any projects that have come in and not proposed parking downtown. And that's reflective of our market.
So did Buffalo abolish the parking requirement in, let's say, in the surrounding neighborhoods?
They
Or
did
was
it
it just in
citywide.
downtown?
No, they did it citywide.
And did they see any change in behaviors in the outlying neighborhoods?
No, for the most part, they saw that there was continuing the provision of the existing amount of parking. I mean, realistically, parking is the most important amenity that any developer provides,
Mhm.
right? So it's, and so most developers are gonna kind of look at that as an amenity that they still wanna offer. But I've talked about kind of from the public policy perspective and the cost-benefit analysis of why the city might not want to be engaged in mandating parking supply, but where there's a benefit is where, frankly, a developer might want to prioritize one thing over another. In a downtown area where there's other transportation options, it opens up opportunities to develop sites that might not otherwise be. The other big example that we look at is affordable housing, is that parking is a considerably high cost.
Right.
And so if I can reduce, or in some cases even eliminate that parking requirement in an affordable housing project, I might get a project where I otherwise would not get a project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna, well, I support getting rid of parking minimums. But we have got to do that in conjunction with at least a plan for a plan.
Right.
To actually, be able to tell residents that it's understandable if people would be upset about this. It's not an unreasonable thing to be upset about. So we need to, I think, part of our job is to say, we've heard you, here's how we're planning to mitigate the risk.
Yeah. So,
Well, yeah, I would just add on to that, that maybe parking management programs are the way to do it, but in acknowledgement, there may be young professionals who have certain transportation preferences or abilities, but in acknowledgement that if you got kids or you're a shift worker, a lot of that with our current transit system is just, that ain't gonna happen.
but it's a choice, right? Because everybody's operating in a marketplace where they're making choices about where they choose to live. And people who need the access to a vehicle are going to choose the place that offers them the easiest means of storing that vehicle, which is why it's the most valuable amenity.
Michael, your point, just that there are some folks who are gonna need a car who can't afford everything that it will have impacts, this policy will have impacts on people that are less well off. You could-
Well, if the market responds as I think it will, it wouldn't, but I just think it's an important acknowledgement. I mean, again, a shift worker or people with kids, they can't walk to the grocery store to get, or scooter to the grocery store to get groceries for their
No, you
kids.
cannot.
And if you're a shift worker, you can't rely on a current transit system without risking getting fired if you're 20 minutes late. So if the market responds as I think it will, it won't matter, but I mean, I think the parking management program may be a way to address it. I just think it's really important for us to acknowledge that. I think there's some people who feel there's a class element of people
Yeah.
who are able to pursue certain transportation options, imposing it without acknowledging
Yeah.
their life situation doesn't match that.
I think that's a really valid point.
The issue, it seems to me, is not so much for, let's say you've created additional dwelling units and the people that are being put in those units want to have a place to park their car. At one point, you can say, well, the market will take care of some of that, but it won't take care of the people who are already living there, who are already there with two cars, who already don't have enough room for parking. And I think the people who are most concerned about it, the ones we've been hearing from most, are the people who are already living in those neighborhoods who say, I have trouble enough parking my cars, or whatever. So that what the market may do for the people moving in doesn't help them one bit. So,
Yeah, which I guess relates to the permit things. What I hear the most is areas where UVA workers come in and
Yeah.
swamp it during the day.
Absolutely.
Right. Or people that, like Michael says, that are shift workers and you end up parking 3 blocks away from where you live because all of these other people are parking that, for whatever reasons. And it's hard, if you have to work in Charlottesville, you have to have a car, because you gotta get there. And some people can, maybe walk to work, or maybe take the bus to work, but the bus doesn't go everywhere where the people are working. Or if the bus goes everywhere where the people are working, the times, as Michael is saying, to get there, some places you can't be late. I mean, one strike and you're out.
So the notion with this section was trying to identify how many discussion work sessions we need. So I've
Means
got.
that we meet twice a week for the next month. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, what are you saying?
Well,
Tell
I'm
me
just-
what you're
I just
saying.
wanna see if I can't nail this down a little bit. I've identified, at least 2 so far. We got one whole meeting on the zoning map.
Mhm.
I've got one on CD&E, the affordable
Right.
housing aspect of this.
Mhm.
It sounds like there's at least a portion of a meeting devoted to this last topic we've just been talking about. Which of these other ones
What about,
are still need further
Are
discussion
you gonna
beyond
get us
tonight?
more on the core
We
neighborhood?
can absolutely do that,
Yeah.
yeah.
and what about, so is the zoning map where we're gonna have the sort of climb up Iwo Jima to talk about medium intensity residential, or is that something we're gonna do beforehand? Or, to me, as I look at this whole thing, that is like the biggest thing that still has to be resolved amongst.
Is that a map conversation?
That's my question, I don't know.
In my mind, it's a map conversation,
Okay.
because the alternative would be eliminating it entirely, at least as I understand it.
Let's have it when we have the map conversation.
We're gonna bring
Sounds
up
like a
the
plan.
Western Mat and the.
Oh, it's not gonna be that bad.
Okay.
I think from what we have, we can
Brian,
propose
please.
some meetings for
You-
y'all with topics.
Do you have enough guidance?
I think so.
Okay. Always, we can
What?
change it next time anyway.
Fair enough.
What, where would the
Like I said,
extent
we gonna
of
meet once a
RNA
week for the next
fall
one.
under?
Isn't that what I said?
Unless we can combine it.
I think we said that we were, one of these meetings is just on these core neighborhood conversations, and I would probably do the map and the text for that together. So separate from the overall zoning map
Okay,
conversation.
So-
yeah, that's something.
Mr. Freeze, a total of, then would that be 3 additional
No, that's
meetings? I'm
4.
trying to,
I think I'm in the 4-ish.
4,
That's
okay.
4.
But we'll have to
Yeah.
work with this, because I think, where I'm gonna, as I come back with this, I'm gonna look and see if there's any things we can put into the same time, but we'll figure that out.
So
We have
do
2 scheduled.
we need to pick the date for the public hearing?
We do have to pick the date for the public hearing, thank you for that.
Wait a minute,
December
we-
5 or 7?
And,
Wait,
uh,
we have 2 scheduled, now we have to add 2 more,
No,
right?
and hold
No.
on, not all of them have to be before the public hearing.
Okay.
Right.
That's what I wanted to get
And
clarity.
so I think what we will need to do is sit down and take this guidance, turn it into a proposal, and then, and probably come back in a conversation with
Okay.
yourself and the mayor and
All right, I
figure
just
this
wanted to
out.
make sure I had that straight as to how many meetings and when.
Right, because
They need
some
to
of them
have-
may be more appropriately
Before
done
the
after
public
the
hearing.
Yes,
That's what I'm
was-
talking,
Okay.
I thought they meant 4 before the public hearing, but you're saying no?
I'm suggesting some may be more appropriately done after the public hearing.
Oh,
I think you could do it.
It's independent.
So is
Necessarily
between
have
the
to be
5th
before
and the
the public
7th,
hearing.
Yeah,
um,
we'll huddle up and talk this over.
yeah, I just,
take that.
I don't
aside.
really have an issue either time, except the 7th, we have a downtown mall committee, is that,
Which we can move. if we
Yeah.
need to. Yeah.
that's the only thing that.
Yeah,
I've got
I'm
going on.
free the 5th and the 7th as well.
Okay.
We're talking like in 4 to, until,
Until,
Are we talking about November the 5th or December?
No,
December.
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 Tuesday or Thursday.
And good, whatever. Make it work.
I can do either. And
Whatever.
generally, I'll just say, I know it's very annoying, but I'm much more side on not rushing to rush. I mean, it's the largest zoning change, if not ever, within a couple of generations, so I don't want us to just rush for the sake of rushing.
Mm.
yeah, do,
No, I want to get a good result. I also want, if we can, to push through.
Agreed.
But if we can't push through, I'm not going to
Yeah.
adopt this stupid ordinance just because we'd set a time schedule.
As much as possible to be in consensus.
Yeah.
There's some things I don't think we're gonna get consensus on, but.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I know, I heard that, I heard
that-
that, I heard that.
So there's no, I don't know what,
yeah.
there's no preference versus Tuesday versus Thursday?
No, just pick a
So
day.
once y'all
Well,
huddled
we'll
up,
have just met on the 4th.
oh,
I think, yes, I think,
You mean
I
on the
agree, the
Yeah,
5th.
council
Soo-
meeting's on the
sooner
4th.
better.
You want to do it on the 5th?
I think
Yes,
so.
We don't have to set it in stone yet, but.
No, I think we should, I think we need to be decisive,
Ah,
I think we need to be decisive.
The 5th is the
Uh,
hearing date?
That would be the
Yeah.
proposed public hearing date.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
all right.
So, point of order, Mr. Mayor, I think, not sure what y'all want to do on making a decision tonight on the date of the public hearing, but I do think while you don't typically take votes at your work sessions, your procedures allow you to do so, and it would be helpful for council to consider a motion to direct the Director of Neighborhood Services to advertise for a public hearing on the zoning ordinance with the changes that council has suggested at this meeting.
Okay,
Does that sound reasonable?
that sounds
so I
reasonable.
move,
What he said.
So moved, is that?
yes.
There you go.
Second from Brian. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
The unanimous? Okay.
Would you just say that's the motion?
Anything
Yeah.
else?
Max,
It's gonna be sent to
Jay will
you.
send that motion to you.
Yeah.
Don't panic.
All right. Nothing else to be done?
Let me just clarifying for myself.
Yes,
We are
sir.
right now scheduled for a work session on the 1st and the 9th. We're sticking with that, or we may change that? What is that?
November now?
Yes, November 1st and November 9th is what's on the calendar right now.
Do I have to commit right now to
No,
answer that?
No.
you can
Okay.
commit to the 1st,
Let's just, can
or you
we,
wanna figure that out.
yeah, I think it would be helpful for us to get together and
Okay.
talk through this, because I think we need to look at what needs to be done to prepare for each of these. I don't want to rush, I don't want
Right.
to schedule the first and then not be prepared for it.
All right, that works.
I've always said that the worst reason to have a
Missy.
meeting is because we've said we're gonna have a meeting.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that
You all,
the
on
conversation
December
happened.
4th, at your regular meeting, will be hearing the Bird Project, which has 6 to 7 different parts to it. I don't know what the timing will be on that, but I just thought that might be helpful as
It's gonna be a
it
long
might be
meeting.
two pretty extensive nights in a row.
We're tough. We're tough.
Thank you for.
We're
That's-
tough.
Pay us the big bucks.
That's right.
Says Leah.
That's right. We're tough. That's right.
Well, you tried, Missy. Thank you all. We're adjourned.
Wow, I think we need to do it sooner.